Hey, this is Matt and Chris. Welcome back to the Quantum Leap podcast. And we have with us today the Season 1 story editor, Season 2 co-producer, the writer of Oh Ye of Little Faith, Leap, Die, Repeat, Judgment Day, and this week's episode, A Kind of Magic. It's Margarita Matthews. Margarita, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a long time coming. I know we wanted to talk to you about Judgment Day. The timing just didn't work out, so it's really great that we could have you on now. So much to talk about. Let's just dive right in. Can you tell me a bit about what your background was before Quantum Leap and what led you to joining the show's team at the start of the first season?
Yeah, so I started out freelancing, which pretty much just meant that I was picking up any job writing that I could. So a lot of that included ghostwriting, which sounds sad when you really think about it, because you're basically giving away, literally signing an NDA saying that you're never going to take credit for whatever you wrote. But it was actually a really incredible experience getting all of that they say 10,000 hours is what you need in order to really get a sense of mastery over a thing. And I felt like that was kind of where I got my hours. So by the time the Quantum Leap opportunity had come up, I had written, countless scripts, countless, pieces of writing that got me really sort of comfortable with who I was as a writer. But the truth is, I don't have a formal background in this. I didn't go to school for it. I'm an immigrant. So for me, that wasn't really a thing that I thought was possible. I never imagined that I could be, writing for film and television. When I first moved out here, I actually, we bought a season pass to Universal Studios, and we used to go on that tram ride. I don't know if you guys been on at Universal. Mm-hmm. So you go on that tram ride, right? And you take it all the way around the back lot. And as immigrants, we paid, so we had to make sure that we made good use of our season pass. So we were going like it was our job. And I memorized that studio tour, and we were going up, past the Jaws shark and up past that little hill. And we used to wave at the people who were there shooting, on set. And there was a moment when I was shooting Oh Ye of Little Faith, where it's that little house right on that hill above the Jaws shark. And the tram, came up as I was going to get a snack from the craft, table. And there were kids on the tram waving at me. And I was just thinking, oh my God, this is a real, full circle moment. So that's a very, very long-winded way of saying, I just kind of, I wrote until I kind of got here. Mm-hmm. I wrote one script and then another script, and I submitted it to competitions and festivals until I got representation. And then that led to, me co-writing a movie, and then my first, writing gig, and so on and so forth. And that's just my experience. Some people have different paths, and people, have formal training. I just happen not to. So, but here we are, talking about it. So something worked out. Something worked out right.
And that you mentioned the Jaws shark. You had to silence the Jaws shark for the filming, didn't you? So you were that shark that you'd enjoyed so many times years before. You were presumably looking at younger versions of yourself, thinking, I'm slightly ruining the tram experience for you, but in a few years' time, you could be here silencing that shark as well.
Absolutely. It's the magic of movies. When we were shooting indoors, we weren't hearing any of that stuff. But and by the time we were doing our outdoor shots, the studio tour was closed. Mm-hmm. And that was, by the way, that was another great moment. We were standing outside doing our sort of like Exorcist exterior shots, and the fireworks were like going off in the background. And so it's kind of like the fireworks and you're shooting the thing, and it's like a perfect, LA night. And you're like, God, not to say dreams do come true, but dreams do come true, so that was the feeling.
When you first started your writing career, you were freelancing, but when you did feature work, were you gravitating towards science fiction more than other genres, or do you have a specific genre that you like to write in now that you're in a time travel show? I'm going to assume you like science fiction, but Quantum Leap is so many different types of story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, you assume right. I definitely like science fiction fantasy. It's what we call genre in the biz. But it's that's definitely always been my favorite. It to me, it's sort of like the best metaphor for reality, and I get a little bored dealing with reality just the way that it is. I think it's much more fun to storytell, from the perspective of these big sweeping metaphors and these things that don't seem like they could ever happen. And Quantum Leap is the really feel good version of that, I think. So that's why I like writing for the show. I think a lot of science fiction is very bleak, which I totally love separately. I think that's definitely that's how I was raised. I was raised on a lot of bleak Russian literature and film, and so I'll take bleak sci-fi any day. But there's something nice about hopeful, optimistic kind of representations of what could be. And they say with sci-fi sometimes we end up informing reality with art. I mean, you think about something like Minority Report or even I think it was 2001 A Space Odyssey, where there were tablets on the screen, and the question is, did Kubrick invent the iPad, or was that sort of the inevitability of the design of a digital tablet? And same thing with Minority Report. Is it that there was this representation of what it would be like to be bombarded by very specific targeted marketing? Or is that the inevitability of marketing? And so, I mean, we might not ever know, but I kind of feel like there is a little that we inform with our art for the future. And so I think anything positive that we can put on screen as far as, representations of what technology can do for good, I think that's good for humanity.
That's kind of funny to me because I'm thinking back to the episodes that you wrote. One of them is pretty bleak. Yeah. Judgment Day is it's got that good bleak sci-fi vibe going, but I probably should have just thought about the scripts you wrote to answer my original question, because Leap Die Repeat is such an in the weeds science fiction story, and it also goes into all the great geeky, like I guess what you would call technobabble on Star Trek, but the Quantum Leap version of that with Janice in the control room and talking about how the repeat is happening and everything. So I guess my question to you is, when you're approaching writing for Quantum, are you thinking about how you can get more into the lore and more into some of the more geeky genre elements, or is it the story first? I guess that's kind of a broad question, but
yeah, no, I think it's a fair one. The on the record answer is story first, right? And that is the correct answer. The nerd in me, of course, is always looking for the fun things to allude to, and the it not just as far as references to other bits of science fiction, but what this show was ultimately based on, right? The original show. And so any opportunity that I have to do, a little wink wink for the original fans, I like that as well. I mean, I'm sure you caught the 666 in the in the Exorcist episode. That was a full blatant wave to the fans. And there was a moment, by the way, where we were running out of time and we almost didn't get that. And it was like, do we really need that for the story? And I was like, we have to get it. This episode doesn't work if we don't get it. And Grismer.
Thank you for doing that.
There you go. And Grismer and I had a lot of fun doing that. But it was I think that of course story is the most important thing. A bunch of references strung together make no sense. But what's a dinner without seasoning is kind of how I feel about it. So I feel like that's totally that. And speaking of that bleak bit in Judgment Day, that was totally the snow falling and all of that. That was kind of a not a direct reference to or anything like that, but that was inspired by that scene in Blade Runner 2049 where he's kind of lies back in the snow. It's one of my favorite moments in modern cinema, and so to be able to kind of do something like that where it's quiet and Ray or Ben, Ray is the actor's name, obviously, steps out to and kind of there's this quiet moment where he touches the snow. Yes, it's bleak and it's a sad thing, but it also is a really beautiful moment, and so I loved it, and I kind of felt like it was okay to have that little bit of bleakness because he fixed everything is how we like to think about it. Maybe the future got corrected in Judgment Day. We don't know. We'll have to see when we get there.
I'm always really interested in how the writing assignments work on a show like Quantum that goes from different genres from one week to the next. And you've had two, as we've spoken about, very nerdy, hard sci-fi episodes, the two nerdiest to date, along with two... to be fair, those are the ones that have really lent into the sci-fi lore more than any of the rest. And two... the horror episode and now the Salem Witch Trials, two slightly more out there episodes in terms of pushing the boundaries of what we can do. I'm interested in kind of two things really: how you end up getting those assignments, and does that also represent the kind of support you give the other writers? Because I know it's a collaborative approach, and everyone's got their fingers in everyone else's episodes. Are you the one in the writer's room that's sort of helping out with the time travel stuff? And is that your thing? Can we feel you in the rest of the series?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people are curious about how writers' rooms work because it's such a mystery, and truly, even as a writer, kind of circling the job of getting into a writer's room. Until I was in a writer's room, I really didn't understand what was happening. So it's a very, very reasonable question. There's a couple of different, ways that assignments happen. Sometimes they just kind of happen because of scheduling, and that's just a thing. And it's like, you're doing this episode and this is kind of what it is. And then you're jumping into it and you're going for it. Generally, if all goes well, the writer is bringing an idea to the table and says, this is kind of what I'd like to do. And, the rest of the room supports that, and the showrunners work with that. And then we all, move forward and create a story together. Sometimes it happens that you say, this is what I want to do. And then it just doesn't work out scheduling wise. And another writer gets to do that. And that also happens. So actually, Leap, Die, Repeat, the idea of doing like a repeating sort of sequence of leaps, that was Ben and Derek wanted to do an episode like that. And then the scheduling didn't work out. So I ended up writing that episode. But and I was desperate to do the Alien episode, desperate of season 2, but it just didn't work out. And that's, I thought that Romy did a beautiful job with that. And so it's, that's just the nature of what it is. And so you got to love it until you and you want to do it, but if you can't do it, you got to support the other person in doing it. But I'd say we're all very involved in that. These episodes, especially anything that's really, fantasy forward or horror forward or genre forward, as we say, is probably me coming to the table and saying, I'm desperate to do an episode about witches, and let's find a way to do it. I wanted to do one in season 1, and it just didn't work out. And so its time came in season 2, and that was that was me going, which episode, every time we talk about let's brainstorm some ideas. I would just witches every time, and eventually I got to do it.
So let's talk witches then. Since you were so desperate to do it, did you have to do a lot of research to get yourself ready for it? I'm getting the impression that actually you had all this in the back of your head already, and it just came to the fore.
Yeah, I mean,
is that fair?
It's totally fair. It's the answer is yes, a lot of research, but a lot of that research also happened to be research that it had been a lifetime of research for me. Yes. Starting with watching, some high school rendition of The Crucible, right? It's like, it's that all that stuff exists, has existed in the back of my head, and I think exists in a lot of viewers' heads. I've kind of found just from talking to like some press, there's a lot of very excited sort of like witch trial, not to say fans of the trials, but fans of the period, in which that happened, and people who want to talk about it and what it meant. Because again, to me, it's a fantastic metaphor. This is the furthest back we've ever gone, but it's such a relevant topic to any year, and I think it's so sad, and that something happening in 1692 could still be relevant in 2020, 324. But that's just the human condition, isn't it? And so I think that was the thing from a storytelling perspective that kind of attracted me to the subject matter. Is that a cat?
It is. Just please just ignore her. She has a tendency to do
what
this.
What is the cat name?
This is Scully.
Sorry, Scully? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd like for Scully to please introduce herself and do a little intro for the podcast.
She always pops up at the most inopportune moments.
Amazing.
And I never edit her out.
If I find out that this cat has been edited out of this podcast, we will have problems.
But I have no idea where we were now.
Well, I know I can follow up.
Bring us back on track.
So we're talking about a kind of magic, and the fact that it is as far back as anybody has ever leaped, so far as we've ever seen on screen anyway. And I was wondering if there were special considerations that you had to take into account when crafting the story, or if you can tell me about what kind of ideas you had, things that you had to be cognizant of, maybe things that you had to discard, because it's really, a different kind of leap on so many levels.
Yeah. Very great question. The answer is, there was a lot to consider. From right off the bat, from just a production standpoint, it was a question of, is this even a producible episode, right? Because we need a town. Can we build that town? Probably not, for a 7-8 day shoot. We need to set the tone for that town. So we're looking at livestock. I was desperate to get a cat in there. So, can we get a cat? Can we do this? Can we do that? And it just sort of piece by piece, by the grace of God, we can only assume, came together, because it was like we found this town that they had built for another movie. I want to say The Revenant. I can't remember off the top of my head. Up in the mountains over here in LA. And so it was sort of already built to look like that time period, more or less. And we dressed it to be a little bit more Massachusetts. And there was this hill that had this little church, which was perfect. And our director, Avi, really fought for all the livestock and the animals. And it kind of, I think that it sounds so silly, but I think those little details are so important, because the minute you drop into the episode, you're like, oh, we're in an episode, something's happening. And I think if you give the viewers that moment, if a lot of the rest of the episode is in a prison cell or indoors elsewhere, they feel like they got a little taste of the authenticity of that time period. So there was production concerns, and then there were also just it's the concern of when you turn on a show on network television and people are speaking Old English, it can be a problem, because people, might think that they got the wrong channel. They might change it. They don't know they're watching Quantum Leap, whatever it is. And I'm a huge fan of, period writing. And so I really wanted to lean into, again, the authenticity of that language, but ultimately had to sort of split the difference and use a couple of words here and there that made you feel like, okay, all right, this is olden, but ultimately, understandable and not something that you need to constantly be rewinding. But off the top of my head, Mauser is a word for cat that most people don't know, and so off the top, the top of the episode, someone says something about that, and not overdoing it with the these and thous and all of that. I think was ultimately the balancing act.
So one of the differences that you even mentioned in the course of the script is, and I'm going to guess this is for dramatic purposes, in Salem they hung the witches. The witches were hanged. So the fact that you guys were having them being burned at the stake, I know it played into the overall story and the arc of the story and also the resolution of the story. But as someone who was or is vested in that period, and you know the ins and outs, you know the facts behind the story, are there other compromises that you felt that you had to make for dramatic purposes?
That was one of the biggest ones, actually. And if memory serves, they kept, because I know we're recording this before the episode has aired officially, so I've seen the cut, but I haven't seen it on TV. If memory serves, they kept this, but I had in the script that in the church, the magistrate says burn, and then the girls say, I thought they hanged witches in Salem. So the reason I wrote that in was because I was worried that somebody wouldn't know the truth and say, well, wait a minute, what a bunch of hacks those writers are. And I wanted you to know, no, we had to change it for dramatic effect more than anything, because the way that the story ultimately goes, there's a burning pyre, and then we're dragging the witches towards the pyre, and it's better dramatically, visually to represent that. And also there was something kind of about, the nooses that was just it's like a step too far for sort of like the tone of Quantum Leap. I think if some of that imagery, I think it's just not conducive to what, it can get in the way of the experience because it's so visually triggering. And so I think that was kind of another reason to go, hey, let's go big and dramatic, and acknowledge that, hey, we're taking liberty for the purposes of the TV show. By the way, that's something that we had to do for episode 11 too. I mean, the reality is that for a nuclear reactor to melt down and explode the way that it does in that episode is highly, highly unlikely. It's just. And by the way, I worked with scientists from the Science and Entertainment Exchange to, confirm facts. And ultimately what you see on screen is theoretically possible. So that was very important to me. But is it the most likely version? No, but a nuclear meltdown isn't necessarily visually interesting to watch. So that was the way that we had to go with it. And that's something that I think I've learned from working in this industry, is that prior to this, I was a big snob about how things were shown on TV, like huge. I would have notes, I would have opinions. Why didn't they do it this way? Oh, that person's accent isn't technically correct. Oh, I understand what they're saying in that other language, and it's not, perfect. And now that I know what it takes to make, TV or film, I mean, you guys, like the speed with which we're making these episodes is astonishing. Like you're sitting down, you're breaking a story. Within a week or two, the story's broken. Then you're off to write. You have a week to write the thing. Then you're shooting. You have a week to shoot the thing, and then you're editing. Like within a couple months, you have, you go from having absolutely nothing to having an entire episode of television. So I no longer look down upon people for what it takes to make something go. But I don't think it's an excuse for not doing what's right. But I think sometimes you just have to know that you have to make compromises and make the best choices, and that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, the show seems like you've explained all the reasons why, a terrifically hard show to produce in a short space of time, remaining accurate yet dramatic, and a kind of magic, I imagine, possibly more so than some of the previous ones, because this would have been right on the cusp of the writer's strike.
Oh, yeah.
Am I right? So,
yeah.
So were you able to stay involved in the production right the way through as far as you had done previously, or was there a point where you had to step back?
We shot, I believe it was half of the episode when we got the news. So we were up on set, and it was we still didn't know if it was going to happen or not. And the rules are the minute that email goes out, it's pencils down. So I think it went out minutes after we wrapped, and so it was very much like, well, it's been nice knowing you. And I said goodbye to everyone and kind of walked off set, and that's what you're supposed to do. And and then you don't touch it from there. So the sort of good news for the episode is that it was already, halfway shot. It was written, the script was there, everything was there. And I felt very comfortable leaving it, to fate from there. We weren't sure if it would pick up after the strike or what would happen. And it ultimately came together, and I think at the end of the day, it turned out the way it was supposed to. So all of it, speaking globally, and speaking specifically about the episode. So yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about that as well, because I was thinking that if you had written the script and you maybe had stepped back from the production, it seems like you just said you were halfway through. Normally during the process, so there are things that you might be, okay, it's on the page, but we're seeing how it plays out between the actors and in the scene. Are there scenes in this that, even though they were produced as written because they had to be, that you might have tweaked or approached differently if you had had the chance?
Nothing jumps to mind, and I think the reason is that we were all working very closely together while we were shooting and while we were prepping. And I really think when you prep the right way and you get on the same page with everyone, and the DP and the director and the writer are all kind of working together, and then theoretically everything should go well, and that's kind of how I think it ultimately did. And the only things that I ever really miss are sometimes there's jokes and things that get cut for time. So I think there was a joke that didn't make it that Ben I think is like in the trial room, and he's talking to the crowd, and he goes, "Friends, I once read a quote that says, magic is just science we don't understand yet." And then it cuts to the girls, and they go, "I didn't know Elizabeth could read." So we cut that part just for time. Things like that I really, really kind of live for. So but it's totally, there's so much stuff that ends up, not to say so much, but there's definitely stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor purely for time. 43 minutes is just not a very long time. And no matter how hard you try to write the perfect length of a script, there's always just, some things take longer, some things don't, some scenes get a little more emotional and they need a little more space to breathe. And so you end up having to cut some of that. There's a much longer director's cut of the Exorcist episode, somewhere as well that exists, so so that's the only thing that I ever miss is just more, right? So it's more jokes, more, more space for the scenes, that kind of thing. But otherwise, it certainly is the vision.
I had one other question about the time period and maybe the balancing act that you had to strike, because it feels to me that the further back in time you send Ben, the more of a fish out of water he's going to be. He's not going to be able to realistically slot himself into these situations because the cultural gap is just so wide. And you had made mention of that. Even one of the characters said to him, you in these last 2 days, you become a different person, essentially. I think she said something like your bearing is different or more strident or something like that. But I'm curious to know, again, being cognizant of what you need to do story-wise, but also to make it believable in that sense. Are there touchstones that you try to hit, or how does that work when you're approaching it?
Just as far as Ben being, fish out of water?
Well, yeah, but also making the character he's so far in the past at this point. I mean, he's almost going to be anachronistic by default. Right. So it's because they're just such disparate time periods.
Right.
So when you're approaching a story like this, and I got to assume now that there is no, limitation to how far back he can leap. Are there things that you have to keep in mind, or that you like a set of rules that you try to keep in mind to make the story seem believable, even in the sense of, these increasingly distant time periods?
Totally. It's well, the thing to keep in mind also, if for us is, we're in season 2 now, and as we hopefully keep going, every time Ben feels like a fish out of water, we have to sort of reinvent that experience, because he can't each time be like, well, whoa, I'm in a new place and what am I going to do? He's savvy. He's getting a sense of how to, pick up on clues and all of that. So in that sense, this was sort of actually a fun opportunity to suspend some of that, because usually if Ben tries to fit in, he fits in pretty well. If he's, thinking, he's using that logic and he's picking up on the clues, he can sort of, fudge his way through the situation. And in this case, the harder he tries, the more he seems to fail, because the more he leans into science and who he really is and reason, the less reasonable the town is, right? Because it just seems more and more like witchcraft to them. So in that sense, it was actually a lot of fun to kind of let him fail a little bit and explore the humor of that. And it was also fun to let the team do something other than turn to Ziggy and say, well, what's happening and what should we do about it, right? The idea of going to the library and getting all these old archival books, and then the idea of that failing and turning to astrology is also kind of part of the fun of all of that. But it's definitely something we're constantly thinking about and keeping in mind, because it's you want to find that balance between humor and the joy of experiencing a new thing, but also believability of this is our protagonist who is not dumb, right? He knows what he's doing, and hopefully that balance was found here.
Okay, I could see like striking that balance. Do you foresee having Ben go back further or as far in as the show progresses? And also, I guess the second part of that is you get to write a lot of really neat sci-fi episodes. Do you have your next big sci-fi idea for the geeks out there?
I always have the next sci-fi idea in the back of my head, but I can't, no spoilers, is the official answer. I think that I'm trying to think what the best way of saying this is, without confirming nor denying, because the truth is we don't know, what we're going to be able to do or not. I know I will always be pitching fun sort of, ideas for, to me, to breaking the mold a little bit. I think what's fun about a show is doing a thing consistently so that people get really comfortable with what they're watching, and then breaking the mold a little bit and jumping to a time period that's really uncomfortable for our protagonist, or, doing something that just is a little unexpected. So I'm always looking for that episode. So I'm sure you'll see more. As far as how far back, in the past and the future, who knows? That's something that I think you'll have to stay tuned to find out.
Well, look forward to that.
Do you think you'll be for your next episode, if you can share, or for your next pitch? Are you likely to be leaning more into that hard science fiction side or more into the fantastical side? Because say those 4 you've had so far have been very much two in one camp, 2 in the other. Where can we expect to see you go next? It's
so funny because it's like you're pointing out the reality of kind of what I love, which is hard science and hard magic. And I think that the fun of a kind of magic is that this was an episode that sort of suggested that maybe they're one and the same, and that is ultimately what I've always kind of loved about Quantum Leap, which is that it's sort of always had a little bit of a spiritual side, not a religious side, but a spiritual side to it, where you're kind of questioning if the quantum accelerator is sort of participating in the experience, and if so, who is the quantum accelerator, and what does that mean for us, and do we have some sort of, metaphorical quantum accelerator in our own lives, and so I think that's always a really fun thing to explore on the show. So I'm never going to tire of that topic, and I think with the Exorcist episode, that was a thing too, that was sort of like, you were really meant to be left with the question of, well, wait a minute, was it or wasn't it? And did she see a thing or didn't she see a thing? And the answer is very much meant to be maybe, right? And so I'm sure you could expect that from me forevermore. But I also think it's fun I just like to embrace any genre. I think the specificity of a kind of like world is really fun. It doesn't have to be overtly science fiction or fantasy. It can be, just the specificity of a time period. I think there's something really, an end of a movie maybe that you're trying to evoke, or something of that nature, maybe a story where, maybe nothing fantastical is happening necessarily, but you're like, oh, I get what this is, and I think what our show aims to do is sort of lure you into that space where you're like, I know what this is going to be. This reminds me of fill in the blank, The Crucible, whatever it might be. And then the ending is meant to be something new and different. So in the case of The Crucible, all those people died, which is what happened in the original, in reality in Salem. And in the case of our show, there's an opportunity to say, hey, what if that's not what happens here, right? I would never go back to, I would never set an episode in Salem and say that those people didn't die, because that would be horrifically disrespectful to what actually happened. But here's an opportunity to set an episode Salem adjacent and say, hey, here's what could happen if people set their fear aside and learn to communicate a little bit better. And again, I think that's sort of speaks to the relentless optimism of the show. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what I'm here for. I'm here for the, relentlessly optimistic storytelling and the sprinkles science fiction.
It's good. I think speaking for the fans, we are as well. So it's really good to know. And in fact, it's been a great 45 minutes talking to you to get a view into your perspective on Quantum Leap and what we can hopefully expect from you in future.
Well, it means a lot to hear from you guys and from just viewers of the show, from fans, because people don't understand how collaborative television is, and from the writer to the director to the editing to the DP to the visual effects, all of that. Sure, that's a part of it, but I think also the viewers are kind of a part of the collaboration of what it is to create an episode of television or create a show, and the reaction and the sort of symbiosis of that is so important, because otherwise we're just kind of screaming into the ether, right? And if the fans aren't watching or don't like it, it's sort of like, what's the point? I mean, you have to always have a healthy sense of like, I would never suggest, hey, you have to write to what people want and ignore your own truth. Never. You should always, be writing the authentic truth of what you want to write. But, it's important to know that things are resonating with our viewers, and it's kind of like standing on a cliff and yelling out, into the abyss, and then you're like, here are my thoughts and feelings, and you're kind of waiting, and then maybe from the depths you hear a small voice that goes, I have those thoughts and feelings too. Like, okay. That's it resonated, and it means something. It becomes this thing that's sort of bigger than all of us. Not to get philosophical on the Quantum Leap podcast. It does become, bigger than all of us in a certain sense. I think that's just kind of how, all of art is. Not to say high art, not to say that we're making high art, but maybe a little bit sometimes. We're trying certainly to make good art, something that, is good to experience and that people really love and that makes you feel, cozy when you're watching it sometimes and thoughtful and emotional in a good way. And again, optimistic.
I think it's absolutely fine to get philosophical. You're speaking to a couple of guys that will gladly speak and record for hours every week about this show and its predecessor. So, it's a show that's worth investing time and emotion into. You mentioned about the fan reaction. I think this one's going to go down really well. I can't wait to see social media over the next 24, 48 hours and see what the reaction is. We really enjoyed it, and we've had such a good time talking to you. Margarita, thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a genuine pleasure, and can't wait to hear what everyone thinks.